chinuch in this context?
But chinuch is education.
Exactly. Chanochen Arpi Darko, educate a child according
to his way,
his own unique way. So chinuch is education. So there's a relationship to this idea of education and dedication. Because when you rededicate the temple after this, remember, it wasn't just Antiochus oppressed the Jews. It was a terrible civil war. A lot of Jews on the Greek side, and it was a deep ideological battle. And a lot of things had to be resolved and were resolved in the process. Indeed, if you look politically, the Maccabees' descendants became your typical petty Middle Eastern despots, and they didn't handle the Roman thing well, and Israel fell into the Roman orbit. They didn't keep the level of integrity and righteousness the first generation had. What's significant about Hanukkah isn't the political outcome. What's significant about Hanukkah is the fact that the first time the Jewish people faced not a conquest, but faced an attempt to eradicate their belief system because there was a profound dislike for what they believed. And internally there was a profound question as to how Judaism, for really intersecting for the first time a highly sophisticated and developed philosophical, scientific, social, and cultural. In other words, to be blunt, if you looked at for all of Egypt's yes, it is. Yeah, for all of Egypt's accomplishments, it was a pretty rigid society that reached a high level of technology, didn't move very far. But Hellenic society, Greek society, produced inquiry, produced the beginnings of what we call science, produced knowledge. There's a tremendous admiration for many elements of the Greek ethos in rabbinic literature very early on. Rabbinic literature that has its sources very close. So it's a very difficult battle because there's a lot of elements that are positive. Not every embrace of something that was found in Greek in Greek knowledge, as if it were, is something that Judaism rejected. From very early on, the sages saw Noah's discussion after Shem and Yaffe cover him over. So the quintessential Semite is Israel, and the quintessential expression of Yaffe, of the European civilization, is the Greek, and this stands even after the Romans, sort of came onto the stage. So it's a very complicated issue, and the rededication of the temple, it couldn't simply tell people, that we're not going to deal with this. You had to deal and wrestle and somehow come up with a way of integrating the broader human knowledge into Judaism without negating Judaism. So Chinuch, it's a new education. The dedication of the temple isn't just we're going to put a lid on everything that happens. We're going to confront it, we're going to wrestle with it, we're going to struggle with it, and we're going to find a way to keep on one hand, to keep the Torah inviolate, to keep the fundamental beliefs of Judaism absolute, but at the same time, to be able to recognize that we're going to confront the world, not going to be afraid of it, we're going to understand what it has to say, and we're going to integrate that in a way that Judaism remains the soul, though the body may change. And this is, of course, the key idea. What did Noah say? Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the great German founder of what we call today neo-orthodoxy, but Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes in his essays on Chanukah, writes this vision of Noah, where he tells Shem and Yaffe that may God be good to Yaffe, may he dwell in the tents of Shem. So what does Shem provide? What does the Torah provide? Obviously, we've heard this many times. On one hand, the Greeks understood deeply the founders of medicine. We understand the human body. We appreciate it. On the other hand, the imperfect body was useless. Cripples were laughed at. Children who were born with physical disabilities were left to die on the hillsides. People who were seen as barbarians had no legal rights in the early Greek city-states. If you did not belong to the polis, if you were not adopted by a member of the polis, you had no rights whatsoever. And in Thucydides, you read about how the Athenians, when faced with a weaker city-state that suggested to them that the gods may not like their conquest of it, it says just the opposite. The fact that we are powerful tells us the gods on our side. And this idea doesn't die here. Napoleon says God is on the side of those with the most battalions. Till God played a little trick on him called the Russian Winter. But be that as it may. Be that as it may. I mean, the fact is that there's this is that the Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says that the vision is that we want the overarching moral and ethical and sort of a set of ethical imperatives, that these have to be the framework, and then within that framework you can build all the science and art and beauty that Yaffe has to offer. And what Antiochus wanted, what the Hellenizers wanted, was to negate that framework, to negate the idea that there are overarching values that trump personal expression, that trump power, that trump knowledge. Not everything you can do with technology is necessarily right. Not every utilitarian calculation of the value of a human being trumps this mystical sense of the value of the soul. So this is what Hanukkah is about. But to acquire this, it required a new education. It acquired the ability to take what is best, and that's the ironic thing about Hanukkah. Hanukkah wasn't simply about the negation of the Hellenic world. It was the ability to recognize that anything that is positive in the human realm has the ability to be perfected by flowing it into the framework, the ethical and spiritual framework the Torah has to offer. So that's the theme of Hanukkah. So in a way, it's often said. In general, I'm not a great fan of kvetches. So there's a kvetch you hear often. What's the kvetch? The kvetch is Sherman's. Hanukkah is it's a minor holiday. The only reason Jews make such a big deal out of it is because it corresponds with the with the religious holidays that exist in Western society, etc. It's the same time as Christmas. But actually, that's not true. If the truth be told, Chanukah is the fundamentally, in terms of practicality, Chanukah is the most timely, fundamentally important holiday all year, because it deals with the question of how do I live in, partake of, benefit from, be a part of this, of all the really good things that Western society, which is a direct outgrowth of that little now almost bankrupt peninsula in the Aegean, but everything flows from there, and the fact is we're struggling with that question every day. How do we not allow its power and its materialism to submerge our spirituality? But how do we make that tremendous power a vehicle? And a tremendous vehicle. I mean, think of something like the internet. I mean, how many people are able to engage other Jews? How much Torah? How much can be done through the internet? Our economic system. If you look at whether they stayed or came here, if you look at what life was like exactly 100 years ago, right before the First World War, for most Jews, the fact is that most Jews weren't deeply versed in Talmud, and they weren't sitting and with a laden Shabbat table, because most people were struggling for existence. They were struggling for basic survival. And when they came here, they were also struggling for survival. Whatever the economic problems, we now live in a world where most of us here in the Jewish community, whether in Israel or here, are not asking the question, how do I prevent my child from starving to death? We're not asking the question, how do I provide the most basic medical care? There are all the issues and all the problems, but they're on a different level. So the very economic development that the Western world has brought, and now you see it going to other parts of the world too. It's spread east. All these changes give us enormous opportunity. A, to express our values, because we have the means to do so, and B, to live with them. But again, there's the challenges of materialism, the challenges of greed, the challenges of the hubris that comes when people imagine they can control everything. Remember New Orleans and Katarina and so on. And in that context, it becomes a challenge. How do we balance that? So Hanukkah is about that balance. So Hanukkah is rightfully celebrated as a big deal among Jews because it is the big answer to the most fundamental question we have if we are to move ahead. And I'll just conclude that this actually, it's from a talk he gave at this time of year. My mentor, Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said a very beautiful thing. He says, look, when enlightenment really got to the Jewish community, when the ghetto gates opened, there were two reactions. Reaction number one is, let's surrender. This is a new world, this is a new truth, a new reality. Welcome, a new reality. So let's just embrace the new reality, let's embrace whatever the philosophy of the day is, and forget about this antiquated Judaism. Like one of the great professors of Judaic studies, one of the founders, I forget his name at the moment, said that his greatest aspiration is to give Judaism a decent burial. Germany, 1830s, 1840s. So he said, so that's one response. Just surrender, just accept that it's expired. But of course, we know what happens when we allow purely temporal humanistic philosophies to guide us. You end up with some pretty bad things. You can think of Stalin and Hitler among a few others. On the other hand, the other reaction is to let's recreate the ghetto. Let's close the doors. Let's not take anything in from the world around us. Let's not interact with the world around us. Let's just lock ourselves up and recreate the ghetto in our own world. And that, of course, does two things. One, it prevents us from having all the advantages that all the new advances give us. Secondly, it means that this tremendous light that we've been gifted as an opportunity to give to others, we are depriving others of that light because we refuse to wrestle with the challenges. So Hanukkah is about navigating that wrestling. And that's why it's so important, and that's why I think we're all here. And whoever would like to say halachah, please say halachah. Gentlemen, where's the other sheet of paper?
Just a second. The prohibition is against excessive gambling?
Right. Basically, here's the thing. The prohibition against gambling is twofold. If you're making your living from gambling, says Maimonides that because gambling only moves money around and does not grow the economy, it doesn't make the world a more settled, civilized place, it's prohibited. It would seem to me that a lot of what Wall Street does also falls into that category. But the specific prohibition about someone who doesn't make his living or her living from gambling is that if you gamble more than a trivial amount of money, trivial depends on who you are. Yeah. If it's a kid, it might be a quarter. For you, it might be $10. But if it's money that you miss, so because you hope to win, when you lose, you don't really give away that money with a good spirit, and therefore it has a taste of theft. Because it's given begrudgingly, because you expected to win, and just like we're supposed to keep away from even a taste of slander, we're supposed to keep away from even a taste of theft. The Talmud says that the flood, that the decree against the generation of the flood was only sealed because of theft, and which is a strange thing to say considering all the other bad things that happen. But the point is that when people no longer respect another person's right to their own property, that also indicates they no longer respect their right to life. It's not coincidental that all the inwardly directed genocides took place, on the whole, took place in societies that had negated the concept of private property. It's an interesting thing to look at. A lack of respect to my right to something I own is a lack of respect to my right to anything that some greater power doesn't decree to you. And by the way, this is why Maimonides says that they tried, with regards to Hanukkah, Maimonides lists three things. It's very interesting. That they stretch forth their hands to stop them from observing Judaism. They seize their daughters. In other words, they negated the family structure. And last of all, that they put their hands out to take their money. Everyone has a right to tax, but the wanton disrespect for someone's property ultimately leads to every other kind of abuse. Physical, sexual, and so on and so forth. So that's why we're very wary about anything that smells like theft, including gambling. So, but dreidel for chocolate coins, for quarters, etc., no big deal.
Bible.
I think this is a gamble over here. I think this is excessive.
Okay, $1,000 for Bible.
Yes, sir.
Do you mind remembering to Parsha Shoftim, please?
What?
In Shoftim, please.
Okay. There are two chapters in two separate books of the Tanakh, of the Bible, that are precisely the same. And I want to know what. You don't have to give me the exact chapter. You have to tell me, basically, you have to give me at least one chapter number and tell me where the other one appears. So, and it's exactly the same with some minor differences. And I want you to tell me one of those differences for $1,000. And if you get stuck with the difference, I will. So it's exactly the same chapter in two places in the Bible. And if you want a hint, it's in two. One is in Nevi'im and one is in Ketuvim.
Oh, nice.
And if you get that, I'll give you a hint as to at least one of the words that changes.
No.
And you cannot use your iPhone. That's unacceptable. There's no lifeline here.
There's no app for Nevi'im and Ketuvim.
So which chapter is almost precisely the same?
30 seconds. 30 seconds. We'll have to.
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay. They wanted 1,000.
Счетчик пошел.
Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. There is a variation.
Let's see, yeah.
There is a variation. What did you find?
No,
He Googled it. Yeah, there's a variation in Birchat HaMazon that will answer both questions.
Okay.
A variation of Birchat HaMazon that will answer both questions.
I know!
A change.
Moshe knows everything.
I know it!
In the Harachman?
One team free, right?
Yes.
In the Harachman?
Go ahead, your team's free.
It's something that we don't say every.
Okay, you guys give up?
Yeah.
No, I don't give up. Every what?
You don't say it every day. One of the variation in benching is some days you say one, some
Mabdul
days.
Migdal?
Okay, yeah. So now tell me what chapters.
It's in Shmuel Alpha base.
Fine. Where's the other one?
It's actually printer's mistake. Mabdul Migdal
No.
is a printer's mistake. Yes, it is.
No. Please pass me.
It is a printer's mistake.
There's a big fat Tanakh there.
Wait, one second.
Next to my wife's black chumash, all the way to the right.
It's right next to each other.
Next to her Mikros Gedolos, there should be a Tanakh, a fat Tanakh.
I think means something for that.
No, it's not a printer's mistake.
No, the weird
There
guys
we
with
are.
Shabbos Omerim, that's a printer's mistake.
Nevi'im and But Shmuel,
Okay,
Shmuel is both Nevi'im.
Shmuel is correct,
We say
but I need the other one.
holidays.
Shmuel is correct, I need the other one.
Until?
It doesn't say in the Torah.
Okay, no, you have to give me a chapter number for one of them.
Chapter number.
Yeah,
Shmuel.
Tillim is right, but give me a chapter number.
I'll give you the chapter number for God's sake.
iPhone.
Chapter number.
Okay, Maishi, do you know the answer? Okay, I don't have Shmuel in here. You have to bring me.
Look at your family.
So it's about Birchat HaMazon?
No, it's about the two. Okay, here's the answer.
Elephant Please.
So give us the answer.
Okay. The answer is, pass me the Shmuel. You'll see it there. The answer is that in Tehillim it's chapter 18 in Tehillim.
Yes.
It's chapter 18 in Tehillim.
What?
Ask Siri.
I doubt Siri knows.
Why?
When?
Yeah, it's 18 in Tehillim. It's chapter 18, and in Tehillim it says Magdil Yeshuot Malko, right? And in Shmuel Aleph, in Shmuel Bet, I'm sorry, it's Shmuel Bet, not Shmuel Aleph, but I told you I'd give that to you because that's a Christian division, not a Jewish one.
You get half of it then.
And it's chapter 22. I told you only needed one of them. It's chapter 22, and at the end of chapter 22, it does not say Magdil Yeshuot Malko, but it says Migdal Yeshuot Malko. Migdal Yeshuot Malko. So Migdal means a tower. Magdil means makes great. On Shabbat, on the weekday, we say Magdil. He will make great because we hope for the coming of the redemption. But the Mashiach cannot come on the Shabbat. He has to keep Shabbat like everyone else. He's just a human being. So Migdal, the tower of salvation. We can't ask God to make great salvation because Mashiach doesn't come on Shabbat. So he's a tower of salvation.
I heard that it was a printer.
The Torah team has said that, but that's Torah team's mistake. Not a Barbanel.
Something to do that like that.
Not the Barbanel. The Abu Draham already discussed it. It was a mistake on the part of the Torah team. Okay, next.
I get something from that.
I just want to know the
I racked my brain.
Mashiach does not come on Shabbat?
Right, Mashiach cannot come on Shabbat because Mashiach can't travel or work or use a telephone.
We have to make a nice clone herself.
But after Mashiach comes,
yeah. Whatever Mashiach needs to do, that individual can't do on Shabbat what they need to do to declare themselves to the Mashiach.
but
They can't tweet,
It's the using of the microphone.
or even tweeting. I'm sure Mashiach will be announced by tweeting.
But after Mashiach comes, will Shabbos still be?
Of course, all the laws stay the same.
Peppies have some
People nearly stop killing each other.
We'll have to get some points.
Okay, Maishi, give them 250. Okay. This is a yeshiva bucket. Come on. Okay, next. I won't give my speech about the lamentable lack of Tanakh instruction and the more traditional yeshiva. But okay.
Ask me any Gemara question. I'll answer you.
I know that. We have Gemara questions. Okay.
What school does
Team.
What school does
Team one. Okay. What do we pick?
Is he Maimonides or?
No, I think he's somewhere.
Team one.
What school are you at?
But you still have Nevi'im at your grade level. You still do Nevi'im. No? We did through 12th grade. Okay. Team one. Team one, go ahead. Take a pick.
Israel.
Okay. Okay, you want a spin or you want 1,000?
No, $100.
Spin or 1,000? Brachot. Okay, so brachot for 400. I'm sorry, it's 800. Excuse me. Moshe, this is 800. Okay, I'll help you out with this one, but you may know the answer. Typically speaking, if you get very expensive clothing, fancy clothing that are fancy, you say Shechiyanu, of course, thanking God for bringing us to this time, giving us something new and special. However, there is one article of clothing, if it's made in the traditional fashion, no matter how expensive, how fancy, and how deeply emotionally connected you are to this article of clothing, and how much joy it brings you, more by women than by men, and no mischief intended, just a fact, you do not make a shechiyon on this article of clothing. What is this article of clothing, and why don't you say shechiyon?
Wow.
Oh, is he a ringer or is he leading us astray?
And what article goes? Okay, why?
Because I'm learning every day. Because the cow has to be killed.
Right, if they're made of leather. Because if even though we're allowed to use animals for our purposes, because an animal loses its life to provide you with your shoes, our joy is not complete, and therefore the sages tell us that we do not make a shechiyanu on shoes, or for that matter, a leather jacket, or a fur coat. You would not say shechiyanu on a fur coat, even if the fur was harvested humanely.
Completely okay.
That's something new, and my mother would say in Yiddish, we're in good health. Would she not be saying that?
No, we're in good health, you say for anything. But to say a blessing of unalloyed joy, if some creature had to end its life to keep you warm or to keep you well shod, the joy is incomplete. The story is told, a very, very interesting story. Before the Baal Shem Tov launched his career as the leader of a Jewish movement, he was a shochet. The last few years,
Thursday night.
he used to slaughter. He used to slaughter animals. So he was in this little village. He left, and a few years later, another shochet came. So all of a sudden, early in the morning, because they begin slaughtering early, the non-Jew, Stefan was his name, who worked in the slaughterhouse all the years, comes knocking on the rabbi's door. He says, "Rabbi, we have a problem." As the internet cartoon strip Itchy Kadoozy goes, Rabbi. If you've never watched Itchy Kadoozy, you should. Unbelievable. So, Rabbi, what's the problem? And he says, this new shochet you got, he's not for real. He says, look, Stefan, I know you've been around the Jewish community for a long time, but since when did you become an expert on the laws of ritual slaughter? He says, look, Shul, that's what they called the Baal Shem Tov. His name was Yisrael, so everyone called him Shul. Easier to say. So he said, when Shul would slaughter, he would you have to make the stone wet in order to properly sharpen the knife, that it shouldn't be jagged. So when Shul would slaughter, he would stand there and he would cry, and when the stone was wet with his tears, he would then sharpen the knife. Says this guy just dips the stone in a bucket of water. He's not for real. So there's a certain ambivalence, there's a certain understanding that you can eat meat, but there's a certain price that's paid, and you need to be aware of it and respect it. They did this session for the different on some of these ethical topics at Leslie. So I got invited, and lo and behold, they had someone there. In addition to the standard religions in this country, they had this fellow from actually down in Rhode Island, from one of the Native American tribes. So I told this story, and he says that they tell a similar story about when they used to go hunting. So there's a very deep idea that you understand, but you don't take a life lightly.
Maybe they are also lost tribe.
Who knows? I just had a long talk with a Pashtun from Waziristan. He's a fellow at Harvard, and he is convinced that the idea of a Jewish organization origins for the Pashtun are accurate.
I've seen this in so many writings.
What? Yes, they get. What did they get? 800. 800. 800 for team one. Anyway,
you were saying chicken who? Chicken Kaduza?
Itchy Kadoozy.
What article? Shoes.
Shoes or anything made of leather or fur.
That was the
Okay, team 3, go ahead.
Question.
Okay, what do you want?
No, let them finish.
1,000 for what, Anna?
You have
what
no
topic?
chance.
Mitzvot.
No, okay, mitzvot for 1,000.
It's gonna be hard. We'll learn something complicated. That's good.
Okay, so mitzvot for 1,000.
Well, you learn.
So what?
Okay, so this actually relates to Chanukah.
Okay.
So you know we light 1, 2, 3, 4, but if you don't have enough to light 1, 2, 3, 4, the actual mitzvah is to light 1 candle each night.
Right.
But what happens if you're really poor, you're really in a difficult bind, and you only have enough oil or 1 candle, and you can either light, now remember, the Hanukkah light cannot be used. The Shabbat candles are supposed to be used. So if you only have, so they're mutually exclusive. You cannot eat your Shabbat meal to the light of the Hanukkah lamp. So if you have 1 candle and you can use it for Shabbat, this is assuming there's no electric lights, right? So you have a dark house and 1 candle. You can use it for Hanukkah and not have light at the table. Or you can use it at the table and fulfill the mitzvot of Shabbat lights, but you won't fulfill the mitzvah of the Chanukah lights. They're both rabbinic. Which one takes precedence?
Hanukkah. Hanukkah, 100%. Hanukkah.
Are you sure?
Yes.
You're wrong.
Yes, Hanukkah.
Why?
Okay, tell me why.
Because, no, I'll explain it. Because Hanukkah is about Shabbat was the observance of Torah. The whole Torah was forbidden.
Not a logical reason, halachic reason.
Halachic reason.
This is a logical reason.
No, because
This is a scar, not a
what was forbidden on Hanukkah. Hanukkah we celebrate the fact that we can celebrate, we can observe Torah. But Torah would have been obliterated, and the observance of Shabbat would have been obliterated had it not been for Hanukkah, for the victory. So, you can't keep Shabbat. So Hanukkah is, because of Hanukkah we keep Shabbat. Shabbat would be probably Shabbat. But it was forbidden. They have a contradiction. No, it's it is Hanukkah.
Okay, so the correct answer is indeed Shabbat. And maybe you can tell us why, since you said Shabbat comes first.
Shabbat is not overruled by any other holiday.
But I told you they're both rabbinic mitzvot. Remember, Shabbat candles are not part of the mitzvah of Shabbat. They're rabbinical mitzvah added to
I'm going to
Shabbat.
go to the parable of it more than the Jews keep Shabbat. Shabbat keeps the Jews.
Right, Bialik, yeah.
And
Or Bialik.
and Shabbat has always and Shabbat is like, without Shabbat it would not be this spiritual and whole understanding of what we need as a people.
Okay, so I want to.
That is not a halachic answer.
However, I want to. First of all, halachically, the reason that Anna gave and the reason you gave are actually the reason why we remain with a tie at the beginning. At the beginning of our discussion, it's halachic reasons and philosophical reasons are often the same. There's what now? So Chanukah and Shabbat, assuming that it's a choice, there's an argument for each on the religious level. However, the reason for Nerot Shabbat originally was that there be light at the table. Artificial light was very expensive back then. The original reason was there should be light at the table so that people don't trip, people can see each other, people are relaxed. If there's no light, it's nerve-wracking, you trip over each other, so it brings peace and harmony to the table. And because the Hanukkah candles are very spiritual, but they bring no peace and harmony because you can't use their light, and the Shabbat candles, in addition to their spiritual reason, which is why we light them today when we have electric lights, have their value, but the Shabbat candles also, in their original premise, they bring peace and harmony to the household because it's hard to keep your temper, as Maimonides says, when you're tripping over sticks and stones. And then the Rambam goes on to say, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe made a very important point that I think a lot of people who commented on this Maimonides have missed, which is Maimonides and Mishnah Torah never makes a philosophical statement that isn't intrinsically tied in with the law. And what the statement he makes is that since the entire purpose of the Torah was given to bring peace to the world, something that brings peace to a household takes precedence over anything else. Now, the reason why this is important is because there are a range of things where we say that the pathways of peace and the need to avoid hatred trump almost all other considerations. That's one of the reasons why, for example, in halachah we don't make a distinction, and this is established halachah, between violating the Shabbos to save a Jew's life and violating the Shabbat to save someone who isn't a member of the Jewish community's life. That you're obliged to do both. So there was someone who wrote from the Hebrew University, wrote a very critical article in the early 1950s that Rabbi Jacobovitz, who was the chief rabbi of England at the time, responded to, saying, well, this is just utilitarian. So Rabbi Jacobovitz made the point that it's not utilitarian, that Jewish law is holistic, and if it makes a statement, there's a reason for it. And to this I'll add what the Rebbe said, that when Maimonides says the purpose of the Torah is to bring peace to the world, that is literally said, which means to say that we are obliged to interpret and understand and apply the Torah in such a way that brings peace and harmony not just within our own home, but within our own community and the world itself. And the Torah gives us ample ability to interpret it in such a way if we're open to it. So because of the overriding importance of peace and harmony as a godly quality that the Torah seeks to imbue, the two equal mitzvot, Shabbat and Chanukah, because Shabbat has the element of peace, it trumps the Hanukkah candles. So there's an even deeper philosophical idea within the practical trumpet.